Thank you very much for the invitation. It's always great to come to Northern Ireland. The purpose of my talk today is to give you confidence in the Bible, in biblical truths, and to be bold in sharing those truths to others, especially if you're in school or college or in the workplace. I want to share with you some experiences I've had over the last 20 years, working in academia, Bristol University. I've also worked at Cambridge University. And I've done what you're not supposed to do, which is share your faith and belief in a creator God in a scientific world. And some really interesting things have happened. And I've known a lot of help from God. And I'll share some of the really interesting experiences. I mean, there's three reasons why I've wanted to witness for creation in the last 20 years. The first reason is I've worked in engineering. I've worked for the European Space Agency, designing rockets and spacecraft. I've worked for the British Olympic cycling team, designing bikes for the Rio Olympics, Tokyo, and soon Paris Olympics. And it's really so obvious to me, design does not happen by chance. You need a designer to design something. But I've also worked in biology as well, producing bio-inspired designs, and every time I study biology, it's so obvious that there is a creator God. So there's two reasons I wanted to share, but there is a third one. When I started my academic career, it was not my intention to stick my head above the parapet, but there was a student who helped me, because there was this student who asked me to speak to a Christian union in the engineering faculty. And it was going to be in a room much smaller than this with 10 students. Unknown to me, the student who invited me invited the whole university. And the day before my little talk, which was going to be about the design of man, the origin of man, how man had come from Adam and evolution was complete nonsense. The day before, I heard there might be a venue change, and then on the day, I found out my talk was going to be in the biggest lecture theatre in the faculty with hundreds of people. And when I turned up, the biology department were there, the paleontology department were there, all of the senior professors, and who were going to hear that their whole careers were a complete waste of time. And I wondered if I could change my slides, and I realized I could not change my slides. So I had to give this talk. And when I looked up in the lecture theatre, I saw 300 angry faces looking down at me. There was one smiling face, the student who invited the whole university. And I thought, well, it's all right for you up there. I'm down here facing 300 machine guns. And so I'm very thankful to that student for getting me to jump in at the deep end. After then, I may as well say what I liked. After that talk, there was a complete riot. And it took 10 years for that riot to calm down. But God brought a lot of good out of that particular talk. The students loved it. Those who were Christian, those who were non-Christian, they thought this was fantastic to have an open debate. But it led to a lot of other things, which I'll share in this talk. So, is this switched on? Here we are. So, in the Bible, so was that you doing it, or was that me? It was you. Okay. Okay. If you watch carefully, excuse me. So if I do this, could you turn it on? So in the Bible, in the book of Daniel. Probably most of you have heard of a very famous event. Nebuchadnezzar built a golden idol, and when the music played, everyone was to bow down to the idol. Otherwise, there was going to be this terrible judgment. They would be thrown into a fiery furnace. So great pressure to conform, to bow down to the idol. But you probably know the story. There were three men, Daniel and his two colleagues, and they were very bold in their witness to God, and they refused to bow down to the idol. And because of that, they were indeed thrown into the fiery furnace. And they said they were prepared to do that even if God didn't save them. But God did actually save them, and there was great blessing in their life. And the testimony of many Christians is, if you do stand up, if you're bold in your witness, then you do know protection and blessing from God. There are many Christians who would say that. So really, that is a summary of what I want to put across in this talk, to encourage you to stand up and be bold with your faith. So what are the ideologies of our age? Because we live in an age with lots of idols. There is the theory of evolution, and I will explain in a minute why that is an ideology. I wouldn't describe it as a scientific theory. I would describe it as an ideology, a humanist ideology. There's also the abortion ideology, the LGBT ideology, the trans ideology, and Black Lives Matters, and there are probably some other ideologies. Sadly, we live in a world today with all of these ideologies. One of the challenges is that the world doesn't see these as ideologies. It's hard for Christians to go into universities to give talks. But if you're promoting LGBT, you're allowed to do that, because that's not seen as an ideology, even though it is an ideology. And so it's a great challenge for students in schools, in colleges, universities. It's very difficult. But I want to, on this slide, just to give you a summary of advice. One is to be as wise as serpents, to understand the law. After there was a riot, after the talk I gave at my university, a very senior professor who went on to become vice-chancellor, he was not a Christian, but he really supported my freedom of speech. One of the things that has amazed me is how many non-Christians have supported me. God has used non-Christians to help me. And he said to me, according to the Human Rights Act, Christians should have freedom of speech. And there are lots of people who will defend that, even on behalf of Christians. But it's really important to recognize what is an ideology, whether you're in school or the workplace. That's a really key thing to do. Pursue peace as far as possible. Daniel did not go around looking for fights. There were lots of times when he quietly got on with his work. And it's the same for us. Don't go around looking for confrontations. I've had long periods working at my university where there have been no conflicts. But be prepared to stand up for truth at the crunch times. That's what Daniel did. If you speak to a military person, they'll say choosing your battles is a really key thing. Don't just jump into every battle, but choose what is a good battle to fight. And explain that Christians support true science. There is this myth that there's some kind of conflict between the Bible and science, but that is absolutely not true. Science always supports the Bible. And that's been my experience and my testimony. It often helps to make arguments in the third person. I often explain this to students and teachers. If someone says to you, it's a fact that people came from monkeys, it's often appropriate to say, excuse me, sir, or miss, but there are some very senior scientists who don't accept that, rather than saying, I don't believe that. It can be better to take away some emotional conflict with you and to make that person argue with someone far, far more senior than themselves. And understand your context. One other thing I would add to that is it often helps to use humor. If I'm in a conflict or a debate with an atheist in my university, I will often try to make it a humorous thing. And I'll say, do you really believe your ancestors, your great-great-grandparents were some kind of ape people? And I do it with a smile. Rather than doing it with an angry face, try to have a humorous debate rather than an angry debate. I think that can be a really helpful thing. I've had lots of humorous, friendly debates with people in my university. There's always a hard core, a minority of angry humanists and atheists, but the majority of people are happy to have a humorous conversation. So the evolution ideology, why is it an ideology? This is a really key thing to understand. Evolution is based on belief, not science. I won't have many quotes, but this is an absolutely key quotation. This is well known in academia. In 1942, a famous scientist, Sir Julian Huxley, said, modern science must rule out special creation. This was a turning point in science, because after Darwin, there were two groups. There were scientists saying, evolution is wrong, and those saying, no, evolution is right. They were mainly humanists. They were mainly people with a Christian worldview. There was a lot of argument, and someone said, we've got to stop this argument. And this guy said, look, let's just make a decision. Modern science must rule out God. God has got to be expelled from the classroom. He didn't give any justification. It was just a decision. Now, that statement is really bad science. It's such bad science to say you're not allowed to consider the possibility of God. So evolution is based on a decision, on a humanist decision. It's not based on a scientific decision. We go to the next slide. This is one key quotation. Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. It's another incredible quote. If I just rephrase that for you, academics know that all the evidence of the world is overwhelming, proving there is a creator. Almost every academic I've spoken to said, yeah, of course, all the evidence points to intelligent design, but we must ignore it because it's not the conclusion we've decided to have. So when you hear evidence supports evolution, evidence is against the Bible, it's not true. People have decided they don't want to believe the Bible. They've decided to ignore the evidence. Imagine going to a court case and the judge says to the jury, forget all the evidence, just make that man guilty. Forget the evidence. That would be a very strange court case, wouldn't it? But that is what has happened in origins in universities. There has been a decision to promote evolution and to say creation is wrong. One more quotation, this time from Richard Dawkins. If you ever read this book, The Greatest Show on Earth, he says what he believes is the evidence for evolution, and he talks about what's called abiogenesis, which is the theory that life just came from a chemical soup. If that doesn't work, evolution completely breaks down, because if it can't start, then it's a nonsense. The whole theory doesn't work. So this is what Richard Dawkins said is the evidence for abiogenesis. And remember, Richard Dawkins is the most positive atheist you could have. So if there's any evidence, he would certainly be promoting it. So this is what he says. We have no evidence about what the first step in making life was, but we do know the kind of step it must have been. It must have been whatever it took to get natural selection started by some process as yet unknown. So he hasn't got a clue. He has not got a clue. And it's quite humorous, isn't it? We do know the kind of thing it is, and we haven't got a clue what it is. So he knows he hasn't got a clue. And this is the person who would absolutely focus on any shred of evidence for abiogenesis. If you're not a Christian, if you're an atheist, do you really want to put your faith in that for something that is completely unknown? So that's the reference for that quote. Fairly recently, in the last couple of years, there was the discovery of the smallest genome of a living creature. So scientists are always on the lookout for the tiniest bacteria or the tiniest creature. Why is that? Because if evolution is true, you should be able to find a very, very simple organism with just a few pieces of genetic information. If you're an evolutionist, you're hoping to find one with, say, 20 pieces of genetic information, which could then come about spontaneously by chance. Hopefully you're going to find one with like 20 pieces of information. The problem is they can't find anything. 2 years ago, they found the smallest creature. It was the record for the smallest creature. And this bacterium has 160,000 base pairs of DNA. So every other creature has far more than this. This is the smallest, the tiniest. And many scientists think they won't find anything smaller than that. So they're hoping for some kind of organism with 20 pieces of information. But the very smallest is 160,000 pieces of information. So what is the conclusion? That does not happen by chance. That would be like expecting a lump of metal to turn into a Boeing 747 spontaneously. There's more chance of that than that organism just appearing from some kind of chemical soup. So the evidence is absolutely against abiogenesis. So to summarize, what is the evidence for abiogenesis? How would we summarize it? So often evolution is, termed this scientific theory, supposedly with great evidence. If it can't start, then it's a rubbish theory. So how do we summarize the evidence? Well, you could say zero. There is zero evidence for abiogenesis. You could say nothing. You could say zilch. You could say naffle. You could say dibbly squit. Over the last 20 years, I've enjoyed going up to famous professors of biology at my university. And I've really senior professors who travel the world giving lectures. And I've said to them, what do you think of abiogenesis? And I remember one of them saying it's like black magic. It's complete rubbish. And I remember another professor of biology saying, well, of course, it can't work. If you know your biology, you know abiogenesis cannot work. You need blind faith to believe in evolution. It's only if you speak to a junior scientist will you hear, yeah, I believe in abiogenesis. I think it could be possible. And then I say, well, speak to those senior scientists, and they'll tell you it cannot happen. Do you want to put your faith in that? Or do you want to put your faith in the God of the Bible, who has the almighty power to create life? Just one more example about abiogenesis requiring faith. A famous atheist professor at Oxford is Peter Atkins, and he had a debate with John Lennox, who I think is from Northern Ireland. And there was a fascinating exchange where John Lennox did a complete checkmate on this guy. And so Peter Atkins from Oxford, he said, my atheism is based on science. It's a great myth and a great lie when you hear this. Atheism is based on science. So John Lennox said, well, if chemical evolution, this abiogenesis, if it was demonstrated to be scientifically impossible, which I think it has, but would he accept intelligent design? And he said, no, I would not accept that scientific result. And John Lennox said, I thought you said your atheism was based on science. And he caught him, and John Lennox knew he could catch him, because Richard Dawkins has been caught in a similar way. These people say, I believe in science, but actually you realize their blind faith in atheism. It comes out in these debates. If you're interested in that, there's a reference just there. Now you might say, well, but surely over the last 100 years, aren't there some really famous scientists who protested about this theory of evolution? And the answer is yes, there are famous scientists who have protested. Here's one example. Sir Ambrose Fleming. He's basically the father of electronics, a very, very famous Cambridge-educated scientist. He founded electronics that led to mobile phones and televisions. He said this, in 1932, his organization produced a pamphlet, "We feel the public are being deceived. Evolution propaganda does not present the facts impartially. It dwells upon those which favor the theory while suppressing those who oppose it. Such are not the methods of true but false science." You've probably noticed how the BBC favor kind of pro-abortion and don't allow pro-life people to speak. It's always been this way the last 100 years. This bias towards humanism rather than true science and a Christian worldview. Here are some Q&A, because I'm sure your head's buzzing with questions. Did Charles Darwin observe evolution? No, he did not. He observed adaptation, and adaptation is not evolution. Adaptation, that's just where creatures change in size or colour, or your children have different looks to you just through natural genetic variation. Darwin did lots of great observations of finches. They called them Darwin's finches, but he observed adaptation, not evolution. Did Darwin discover inheritance of traits? No, he didn't discover it. You can read about inheritance of traits in Genesis 31, where Jacob noticed some of the sheep were spotted and some of the sheep were not spotted. Adam and Eve would have observed inheritance of genetic traits. Darwin did observe it, and he did very good observations of it, but he wasn't the one who discovered it. Has anyone observed abiogenesis? No, it's impossible. Has anyone observed macroevolution, like land creatures turning into birds? No, there's no evidence of new information for that happening. Do top biologists believe in abiogenesis? Not in my experience. And do top biologists believe in macroevolution? Many, many have doubts. Monkey to man charts. These are very familiar charts. They're often shown in schools. But these are based on fake science. If we just put some quotes down, I could give you lots of quotes by evolutionists who say these pictures are incorrect, there's no evidence for them, and I could show you, in fact, if you look at the last quotation there, the misleading diagram should be removed from biology books in schools. These are quotations from evolutionists who admit there is no evidence for monkey to man charts. They probably won't be removed from schools because humanists will kick up a fuss and say, well, children should be taught that, even though there is no evidence, because remember, they've made a conscious decision that people should believe this, despite the fact that there is no evidence for this actually happening. Okay, if we go to the next slide. These people here, you've probably seen Alice Roberts, Richard Dawkins on the television. What these people don't do is reveal their worldview, because Alice Roberts has been the president of Humanists UK, the British Humanist Society. Richard Dawkins has been at least vice president of the British Humanist Society. They claim they're pushing science, but they're actually pushing their humanist world view. And as Christians, even if you're not a Christian, it's so important to see the world view of the people who are teaching you on television or in schools. So why do I refuse to be silent? The work I've done, designing spacecraft, atomic force microscopes, working for the British Olympic cycling team, it's so clear to me that design does not happen by chance. And all of the work I've done has really encouraged me in my faith, has confirmed my faith that there must be a creator God. Here are 3 examples of great scientists who believed in biblical creation. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientists that ever lived, and there were various parts of creation like the human thumb that convinced him there was a creator. James Clerk Maxwell and Lord Kelvin, 2 of the greatest scientists that ever lived, they both came after Charles Darwin and did not like his theory. They believed in biblical creation. If you believe in Genesis, in biblical creation, you stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest scientist that ever lived. Do not ever be embarrassed about believing in Genesis. And would you really want to believe in a theory that has absolutely no evidence, and a theory of evolution, the whole point of which is to attack God and attack the Bible? In 2021, I published a paper on animal joints and amazing mechanical design in animal joints. I published this in the Institute of Physics. If you're a technically minded person who wants to go into a lot of depth into evidence for creation, you're welcome to look this paper up. If we go to the next slide, in the paper I present 10 animal joints that have the most incredible mechanical linkages called linkage mechanisms, far more complicated than car suspension systems, car steering systems. The mantis shrimp, I don't know if you've ever heard of a mantis shrimp, but it has this, it's like a gun. It has this deployable appendage that smashes snails, and research has shown that it comes out faster than the speed of a bullet. And scientists are absolutely astounded at the precision engineering in these joints. And I presented 10 joints in this Institute of Physics paper two years ago. It's had 7,000 downloads and has become a slightly famous paper. But the whole point of producing that paper is to give 10 examples of animal joints that could not possibly evolve by chance, but must have been designed. So it's very encouraging to get that published. So do look at that paper if you're interested in some of the really technical arguments in evidence for intelligent design. I've also done lots of work on biomimetics. I am currently the editor of a journal called Biomimetics, one of the biggest bioengineering journals in the world. There's a special issue being produced at the moment, and that's very encouraging to me because I see all these papers where engineers and biologists are basically saying that God's creation, well, they don't call it God's creation, they say nature is the gold standard of design and engineers must copy it. And to me, that's wonderful. Just great evidence for creation having a designer. But I have had pressure on me from humanists not to share evidence for creation. Alice Roberts, you've probably seen her on BBC TV, and as I said, she's been the president of the British Humanist Society, and she once said, laws are needed to stop even private Christian schools teaching creation alongside evolution. in science lessons. She wants children to be forced to be humanist, forced not to be taught the Bible. She's very ferocious in her promotion of humanism. There have been some newspapers that have been supportive of me, but some not so. I was once in the coffee room at my university, and I could see my colleague reading a newspaper. It wasn't a Christian. And on the front page, it said, "Intelligent design creeps onto courses." And I said to my colleague, "I think someone's in trouble here." And he said, "Yes, and the person is you, because your name is in there, and your picture's in there, not just your name. Apparently, you're bringing intelligent design onto your course." And I thought, well, that's a bit strange. I don't think I brought intelligent design into my course. But it's like this cancel culture, naming and shaming people who dare to do that. Actually, a lot of my colleagues said, well, you should have the freedom of speech to do that, so we support you doing that. There was another article in the Telegraph. You can see Richard Dawkins looking a bit glum at the top, and I have a smile, which is quite nice at the bottom. And that was talking about this big debate between atheism and creation. The Telegraph were a bit more friendly towards intelligent design in that article. Here are some quotations, and in these quotations, this is the minority of humanists, scientists, and they can be very bullying. You know, when Dawkins says, if you meet someone who claims to believe in evolution, who does not believe in evolution, that person is either ignorant, stupid, or insane. Stephen Jones said creationists spread pure poison, and Richard Dawkins said no reputable scientist disputes evolution. Now, if you're going to be a student in biology, you need to be very wise, because you will be met with this barrage of criticism, which is really kind of a bullying tactic. It won't come from all academics, but there will be a minority who will really label you as stupid, and that is tough. I know biology students who've had a very tough time in academia because of bullying like this. There are lots of books coming out attacking the Bible, saying we are not fearfully and wonderfully made. The last one, Nathan Lentz, published in 2018, he really attacks Psalm 139, verse 14. He says, no, we're not fearfully and wonderfully made. I've published some papers in America attacking his book, saying, no, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's not qualified on most of the things he's talking about in that book. So there's a real fierce battle going on, particularly concerning the design of the human body. Academics on both sides battling away on that. Just to give you, in this last section, a really personal testimony. In 2000, I wrote a book, Hallmarks of Design, which is still in print now. And I wrote that based on my own research. And when I produced the book, as I was producing it, some people in academia said to me, do not write this book. And I said, well, but why shouldn't I write this book? And they said, well, if you write this book, scientists might, then the general public might think that scientists believe in creation. And I said, but I want the general public to know that scientists believe in creation. And then they said, well, okay, if you really want to publish the book, wait till you're retired, because that's what most people do, you know, for controversial things. And I said, but I'm 36 years old, and if I wait till I'm retired, that I've got to wait like nearly 30 years. I can't wait till I'm retired. So I refused to do that. So they said, okay then, but do not put your qualifications in the book. And I said, well, but why not? And they say, yeah, well, because, you know, if you put your qualifications on the book, you know, people will think, yeah, there must be real, you know, truth in this evidence for creation. And I said, but I'm talking about things that is my subject. I'm a professor of engineering design, and I work in bioengineering, and I'm speaking about my own work in my own lab, so I've got to put the qualifications on my book. And they said, okay, we'll put a disclaimer on your publications to say no one else believes what you believe. And I refused to do that because I said, well, actually, I know a lot of people, even in this university, who support what I'm doing. And someone else pointed out to me, you can go right back to Martin Luther. He was told, do not publish your books. And right through the Reformation, so often people are told, do not witness. You have to bow down to the ideologies of today. So I ignored it all and I went ahead. Anyway, there were a lot of complaints went to the Vice-Chancellor from very senior professors around the country saying, our concern is Burgess using his work address for publications and not linked to what he's employed to do. I'm not employed to think about intelligent design, even though I'm studying design in engineering and the natural world. So I'm not supposed to have freedom of speech. I'm not supposed to have freedom of thinking in my own job. So there was really quite a battle. I've also had threats. This is a letter from an atheist organization, the Brights Association, and I've had lots of letters and emails like this saying they're very concerned that I mention anything about the possibility of design in nature, and I should be called to account, I should be punished, demoted. If the evolutionists were so confident, why do they get so angry and defensive and want to shut people up and cancel people? Doesn't that show they're not very confident in what they believe? And this is probably the worst thing that ever happened to me. There was a really nasty website called the British Centre for Science Education. It's run by a group of nutcases, kind of hardline atheists trying to stir up a lot of trouble without any scientific qualifications whatsoever. And they had a plan to write to all the heads of department at Bristol University to claim I had said certain things. And I didn't know they planned to do this. I had no idea. I had an email from the most famous professor at my university, Sir Michael Berry, Fellow of the Royal Society, and he said to me, Stuart, is it true you think I work for the devil? And I was completely confused and really worried when he said that. And other heads of departments also said certain things, and I had no idea where this had come from. Only later did I realize that other people in my university had been told things claiming that I had said things about them, and I had no idea what was going on. These kind of things at the time were really very upsetting. Things told to my students. It was almost worse when they wrote to people under me rather than other senior people. Very underhand attacks. But I've had very great encouragements and absolutely known the Lord's hand and the Lord being in control of absolutely everything. After some of the toughest times were when I had some of the greatest blessings. One of the hardest times, just afterwards, the British Olympic cycling team came to me and said, you know, you've been working on change, you've worked on spacecraft, we would like you to design the precision transmission for the British Olympic cycling team. And I've been doing that for the last 8 years and still working on it for the Paris Olympics. So some of the, God has absolutely been in control of things going on. I gave my inaugural lecture as a professor in 2007, and Sir Michael Berry, he came to my lecture because he found out that it was very underhand what had been done against me. And he ended up becoming my friend, and I was the only engineering professor to who he came to the inaugural lecture, so my colleagues were very jealous. So that all backfired against the atheists. And he wrote to me. He said he enjoyed the lecture. He's actually an atheist, but he became a friend because of what those angry humanists had done. I was invited to Parliament in 2007 to give comments, to discuss, to stand up for intelligent design in education, although the humanists have really held the upper hand in Parliament for various reasons. The Independent asked me to write an article supporting intelligent design in the newspapers, so it hasn't all been in one direction. There have been some really good opportunities to witness for creation. One of the biggest encouragements has been support from students. That lecture I spoke about at the beginning, which caused a riot, which I wouldn't have planned myself and caused a lot of trouble. And I wondered if it was worth it. But after the lecture, many students came up to me and said that lecture has made them think about origins. And I asked some of the students, were you convinced by some of the arguments I put forward? And most of the students said they couldn't remember a single word I said. Couldn't remember anything I said, but they were fascinated at the emotion and the anger at the lecture, how angry the humanists were. And that anger and emotion made them fascinated to learn more about creation. People are often more interested in the emotion than the actual facts of the argument, which is what I learned. So God did bring a lot of blessing out of a talk, which I thought was a great conflict and a great big argument. This is the most important thing that happened to me at Bristol University. And this happened after I had come to Belfast, hence the Belfast Telegraph. I came to Belfast with Ken Ham, so it's all his fault. So we were giving a series of talks. Ken Ham was talking and I was talking. And a journalist from the Belfast Telegraph came to my talk. And I haven't got the whole letter here, but he interviewed the general public. And they said to him, yeah, this sounds really convincing what Professor Burgess is saying. And the journalist got really angry, and the journalist was obviously a humanist. So he wrote to my Vice-Chancellor the same thing that quite a few other people have been writing, but he wrote this: does the university approve of its name being attached to the creation books by Burgess? If it does not endorse this material, what action does it intend to take to ensure its name is not used in this way? So it's quite a leading email goading my university to take action against me. By the way, do any of you know Lewis Reed? He's from Northern Ireland. Anyway, I knew that the Vice-Chancellor's office had to respond to this, and I had a very nervous wait of 1 week to see if I would be banned from giving creation talks in Belfast again. So this was the response after a week. Things had really come to a head. Could I still put my university connections not only on my books, but there was a request that I couldn't even mention my university qualifications in a church like this. I'd have to disassociate what I'm saying from my science, and I refused to do that. Anyway, so the Vice-Chancellor responded to this email, and so the response was this: we do not regard this as advertising. It is a statement of fact. Professor Burgess does indeed work at Bristol University. So I was very, very happy when I read that. And then the next part of the email: does the university approve of its name being attached to this publication? It would be difficult to object to a statement of fact. As I said earlier, Professor Burgess does indeed work here. Very relieved to hear that. If it does endorse this material, on what scientifically accepted principles? Not applicable, see earlier response. And if it does not endorse this material, what action? And then not applicable, see earlier response. So I was overjoyed and very thankful to the Lord for the support of that. And I've been really amazed how God has used even non-Christians in my university to support me with freedom of speech over the last 20 years. Most academics are fairly agnostic. In a bit of a lazy way, they just allow these things to happen. There is a minority of fervent humanists who stir up trouble. The last 8 years, I've had a wonderful time working with the British Olympic cycling team. Was very, very successful in the Rio Olympics and Tokyo, coming top of the medal table for cycling. In 2017, I was invited to exhibit the work at the Royal Society in London. We had 14,000 visitors. That was a great blessing, great encouragement. And this is the Minister of State who visited the exhibition. And this guy is the Chief Economic Advisory to the Treasury. And he came along as well and wanted me to give him advice on all his bicycles, which I was very happy to do. So that was a great encouragement and blessing. That was the top of the Tokyo Olympic tables. Another great encouragement. After I had some trouble at one meeting I gave in the south of England. It was gate crashed by the Winchester humanist group, and they had a huge website against me with like a 6,000 word essay of why everything I was saying was wrong. And one thing which was very humbling was my boss, the head of school, a very senior professor at Bristol. He's not a Christian, but he stood up for me. He wrote to this humanist organization and put it, and his response is on their website. And it's much longer than this, a very humbling response. And he was really saying to them, you put your trust in this Richard Dawkins, doesn't really know anything. If you look at the work of Professor Burgess, he does understand design. And so this was incredibly encouraging. A really interesting thing is my boss didn't tell me he'd done this. It was only about 7 years later someone said, you must look at that website and see what your boss has written, standing up for you. God used these people to support me. I've had lots of other opportunities around the world. Just to mention one, I was asked to speak in Wells Cathedral to a school's conference. So sometimes some really unusual conferences come up. I have had some exchanges with Richard Dawkins. He's accused me and Andy McIntosh of gross error, of course. But there's one thing I do agree with Richard Dawkins on. If you look on his website, he says, maybe Burgess and McIntosh are right and all the rest of us are wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but catastrophically, appallingly, devastatingly wrong. If Burgess and McIntosh are right, the scientific establishment has fallen. Well, it's not science that's fallen, it's evolution, which was false. So this is one point I completely agree with Richard Dawkins. As you heard earlier, King Charles did quote from my book in his wreath lectures to 90 million people. And his quote, I didn't ask him to make this quote, but it was just fantastic. Why should modern science rule out special creation? That is the massive mistake that modern science has made. By ruling out special creation, it has dug a humanist hole for itself, the biggest mistake in the history of science. So the summary of advice: be wise, pursue peace as far as possible. Don't look for fights, but be prepared to stand up for truth like Daniel did. Remember, true science supports the Bible. Make those arguments in the third person. Understand your context and use humor wherever possible. And remember, God honors those who honor him. I hope you find that encouraging. Thank you. God bless you.